The crazy mountains of Montana do not welcome visitors. They endure them. There is a jagged, tooth-like quality to the peaks that suggests the earth itself is trying to bite back at the sky. In late September of the year 2014, 3 men entered this wilderness with the intent of bringing home elk. One of them would never leave. At least, not in the way he arrived. Aaron Hedges was not a novice to the biting cold or the deceptive shadows of the high country. He stood 35 years old with a lifetime of dirt under his fingernails and the steady pulse of a man who understood the stakes of the hunt. He carried a heavy pack and a rifle that felt like an extension of his own arm. His boots were broken in. His mind was sharp, and the mountains were waiting in a hungry silence. The group planned to push towards Sunlight Lake, a high alpine basin tucked into the granite ribs of the range. The air at that altitude is thin and tastes of ancient stone and impending snow. As they moved, the silence of the woods began to feel heavy, almost tactile. It was the kind of quiet that rings in your ears like a warning, a sound that suggests you are being watched by eyes that do not blink. Near the base of a steep ridge, Aaron decided to take a different route than his companions. He believed he could cut across a northern slope and meet them at the designated campsite before the sun dipped below the jagged horizon. It was a standard tactical move for a seasoned hunter who trusted his legs and his internal compass. His friends watched him peel away into the thick timber, his orange vest a flickering flame among the dark, suffocating pines. The separation was supposed to last only a few hours, a brief detour in a day of rugged sport. But as the clock moved toward 5 in the afternoon, the sky turned the color of a bruised plum. A wall of gray clouds tumbled over the peaks with a speed that felt malicious and calculated. The temperature plummeted 40 degrees in a matter of minutes, and the first flakes of a blinding blizzard began to fall with a wet, heavy finality. By the time his friends reached the lake, the world had been erased by a screaming white static. They built a fire and waited, calling out his name into the howling wind until their throats were raw. Their voices were swallowed by the storm before they could travel 20 feet into the darkness. They hoped Aaron had found a natural shelter, a cave or a thicket of spruce to hunker down in while the mountain vented its fury. But as the first night bled into a freezing morning, the realization began to sink in like a cold blade between the ribs. Aaron was out there in a landscape that had become a monochromatic nightmare of ice and shadow. The missing 411 cases often begin this way, with a sudden, violent change in the environment that resets the rules of survival. The mountains were no longer a hunting ground. They were a predatory entity that had closed its jaws. Search and rescue teams were mobilized as soon as the weather broke enough for boots to hit the ground. They brought in dogs with sensitive noses and helicopters equipped with thermal imaging that could spot a field mouse from 1,000 feet. They found his tracks in the fresh, virgin snow near a box canyon that led toward the interior of the range. The prints were deep and steady, showing the gait of a man who was moving with purpose and without injury. Then, without warning, the tracks simply ended in the middle of a wide clearing. It was as if he had stepped off the edge of the physical world and into the ether. The dogs reached the final footprint and began to circle in a frantic, confused state, their tails tucked tight between their legs. They refused to scent further into the trees, whining at the empty air as if something invisible and massive was standing directly in front of them. The searchers looked at each other in the chilling silence of the clearing, feeling the hair on their necks stand up. The mountain was holding its breath, watching the tiny men scramble over its skin. For days, the search intensified. Scouring every inch of the drainage and the surrounding ridges, they looked for the gray plume of a signal fire or the orange glint of a vest in the morning sun. Nothing was found. No blood. No discarded gear. No sign of a struggle with a grizzly or a mountain lion. Aaron Hedges had become a ghost in the machine of the great Montana wilderness. The search was eventually scaled back as the winter snows returned, locking the crazy mountains in a tomb of ice that would not melt for months. His family was left with a jagged hole in their lives that no amount of logic or prayer could fill. They spoke of a man who was too smart to get lost and too strong to succumb to a simple storm. The case grew cold, buried beneath the white blanket of a mountain range that keeps its secrets well. The name Aaron Hedges became a whisper in the hunting camps, a cautionary tale told over fading embers. 1 year later, in the summer of the year 2015, The mountain began to give up its secrets in the most disturbing way imaginable. A group of hikers, miles away from the last known tracks, stumbled upon a pair of boots. They were sitting on a flat, moss-covered rock, positioned as if someone had just stepped out of them and walked into the air. They were Aaron's boots, weathered by a year of rain and sun, but unmistakably his. The location of the boots made no sense to the veteran searchers who had mapped every inch of the primary search zone. To reach that spot, Aaron would have had to travel over a high, treacherous mountain pass in the dead of a blizzard. He would have had to hike miles in the opposite direction of his intended camp and his original trailhead. He would have had to do it while losing his mind to the cold, or while being guided by a force we do not understand. The discovery of the boots triggered a new search of the immediate, rugged terrain. Under a massive, ancient pine tree that looked like a sentinel of another age, they found more of his belongings. His thermal underwear was tucked into a neat pile, shielded from the worst of the elements. His hydration pack was leaning against the rough bark of the trunk, completely empty of water. There was no sign of a body, only the remnants of a man who had slowly and methodically dismantled his own defenses. In the world of the missing 411, this is a recurring and terrifying motif that defies easy explanation. Victims are often found missing their footwear or essential layers of clothing in sub-zero temperatures. Skeptics call it paradoxical undressing, a symptom of extreme hypothermia where the brain misfires and feels a false sensation of burning heat. But how does a man walk miles across jagged granite and waist-deep snow without boots? His feet should have been shredded, the skin and muscle left behind on the sharp stones like a trail of bloody breadcrumbs. Yet there was nothing. No blood on the rocks. No scraps of wool socks caught in the low brush. It was as if he had floated to that tree, or as if the ground beneath him had shifted like a conveyor belt. The mystery deepened further when his rifle was never recovered during any of the subsequent searches. A hunter does not abandon his weapon unless his hands no longer belong to his will. The rifle is more than a tool. It is a lifeline and a symbol of authority in the wild. For Aaron to leave his boots and his thermals but keep his rifle or have it vanish entirely suggested a narrative that was not driven by simple biology. The searchers reported a strange feeling in that part of the mountain, a sense of being out of sync with time. Some claimed their watches lost minutes, while others felt a crushing weight of depression that lifted the moment they left the drainage. It was as if the area around the boots was a dead zone where the laws of physics were merely suggestions. The mountain was playing with the searchers just as it had played with Aaron. In June of the year 2016, nearly 2 years after he first vanished, a rancher was out checking fences on the far side of the range. He spotted something white and weathered, caught in a dense, thorny thicket of brush near a small stream. It was a human skull, bleached to a stark white by the high-altitude sun. The rest of Aaron Hedges was scattered in a small radius nearby, his bones appearing as if they had been dropped from a great height. He was found in an area that had been cleared by ground crews and aerial observers at least 3 times during the initial search. The spot was miles away from the boots, and even further from the original trailhead where he had waved goodbye. It was a place he should never have been able to reach on foot, especially in the condition he must have been in. He was found at a lower elevation, where the creek sang a low, bubbling song that masked the silence of the peaks. The spatial distortion theory suggests that the mountains are not always the fixed, solid objects we perceive them to be. In certain high-energy zones, or during specific atmospheric conditions, the distance between 2 points can collapse. Aaron might have stepped into a fold in the world, a place where a single step carries you across a valley. He wasn't lost in the woods in the way we understand it. He was lost in the very fabric of the earth. Think of the mountain as a predator that doesn't use claws, but uses the environment itself to disorient and consume its prey. It uses the silence to deafen your reason and the snow to blind your eyes to the path. And once you are broken, it moves your body like a pawn on a chessboard of stone and ice. The boots were placed on that rock as a marker, a cruel joke or a trophy left for those who dared to come looking for the lost. When the medical examiner finally looked at the remains, there was no clear cause of death that could be determined from the dry bone. The skeletal remains showed no signs of trauma from a fall, no broken limbs that would indicate a stumble down a slope. There were no marks from the teeth of a cougar or the heavy claws of a grizzly bear. Aaron Hedges had simply stopped existing as a living man until the mountain decided it was time for his bones to be found. The case of Aaron Hedges remains one of the most baffling and chilling entries in the entire missing 411 archives. It defies the standard patterns of search and rescue and challenges every assumption we have about human endurance and psychology. We like to think of the wilderness as a place we can master if we only have the right gear and the right training. Aaron Hedges had the best gear, the best training, and a lifetime of experience. And in the end, none of it mattered against the mountain. There is a sense of profound, soul-crushing isolation when you stand in the spot where his remains were discovered. You can feel the weight of the peaks pressing down on your chest like a physical hand. You realize with a sudden, sharp clarity that you are not at the top of the food chain in the crazy mountains. You are just a guest whose invitation can be revoked at any moment. And the host is anything but friendly. This case bears a striking and haunting resemblance to the disappearance of Stacey Arras in Yosemite National Park decades earlier. In July of the year 1981, she walked a short distance from her group to take a photograph of the scenery and vanished into thin air. Like Aaron, she was in a high-altitude environment and left behind only a small, cryptic clue, a camera lens cap, before disappearing into the silence forever. The crazy mountains still stand today, indifferent to the lives they take and the families they break. They are a place of staggering beauty and a place of absolute, primitive terror. If you ever find yourself hiking those jagged, lonely trails, listen closely to the wind as it whistles through the granite. If the silence becomes too heavy to bear, if the trees start to look like they are shifting when you aren't looking, turn back immediately. The mountain might be getting ready to fold the map, and you do not want to be caught in the crease. Aaron Hedges was a man of the woods, a man of great physical strength, and a man who loved his family deeply. He deserves to be remembered not just as a cold statistic in a book, but as a warning to everyone who thinks they know the wild. The world is much larger, much older, and much stranger than our modern minds are led to believe, and sometimes without reason or mercy. The mountain simply decides it wants to keep you for itself. Stay on the marked trails. Keep your boots laced tight until you are back in the safety of your home. And never, ever trust the silence of the high peaks. The missing 411 is not just a collection of tragic stories. It is a map of the places where the light of reason does not reach. Sleep well tonight. If the mountain and its shifting shadows let you, the story of Aaron Hedges is a testament to the fact that we are never truly alone in the woods. Even when we cannot see who is watching us, his boots, his thermals, and his final resting place form a triangle of impossibility that haunts the history of Montana. We may never know what he saw in those final hours, or what force moved him across the peaks like a ghost. All we have left are the questions that the wind refuses to answer, and the bones that the earth eventually returned. The silence of the crazy mountains is a heavy shroud that covers many such secrets. Each year, more people go in, and most come out with nothing more than sore muscles and good memories. But for a few, the mountain reveals its true face. A face of stone and ice and ancient hunger. When you look up at those peaks, remember Aaron Hedges. And remember that the mountain is looking back at you. It does not matter how fast you can run or how well you can shoot when the ground beneath you is no longer solid. It does not matter how much water you carry when the air itself turns against your lungs. The only thing that matters is that you respect the boundary between our world and the one that exists in the shadows of the pines. Do not wander off the path. Do not ignore the feeling of being watched. And always leave a way home. The shadows are lengthening now, and the air is growing cold as the sun dips behind the granite teeth of the range. The story of the hunter who became the hunted is a dark chapter in the lore of the American West. But it is a chapter that must be read, so that we do not forget the names of those the wilderness claimed. Aaron Hedges, lost in 2014. Found in 2016. Never truly explained. The final word belongs to the mountain, and it is a word spoken in the language of the wind and the snow. It is a word that means stay away, or stay forever. We choose to listen, or we choose to become part of the mystery ourselves. The choice is yours every time you step over the trailhead and into the green cathedrals of the wild. Just remember, the mountain never forgets a face. and it never loses its way. We will continue to watch the ridgelines and search the valleys for those who have gone missing. We will continue to ask the questions that no one wants to answer. Because as long as there are places like the crazy mountains, there will be stories like this one. Stories of the missing 411. And the people who walked into the trees and never came back the same way. The peaks are glowing orange now in the last light of the day, looking like embers in a dying fire. Soon it will be dark, and the mountain will begin its nightly work of shifting and folding. If you are out there, find your way back to the light as fast as you can. For Aaron Hedges, the light went out a long time ago, and the mountain is still holding on to the rest of the story. Good night, and keep your eyes on the tree line. The world is thinner than you think, and the things that live in the thin places, they are always hungry for a new story to tell. Don't let it be yours. Final thought. The boots were found facing north, but Aaron was found to the south. And the truth is nowhere to be found at all.